Welcome to the weather forecast on VTV Tien. Ladies and gentlemen, floods ravage Italy, when an entire region disappears in just a few hours. An entire city in Italy has turned into a sea of water. Roads that were once crowded with vehicles are now just murky water, swallowing everything in their path. In just a few short hours, northern and central Italy have been completely transformed by the fury of nature. Once densely populated residential areas are now deep under thick mud. Bridges have collapsed, roads have broken, heavy trucks swept away by the water like hollow toys. A major bridge, the pride of the region, has collapsed like a piece of cardboard. Millions of people live in panic, forced to leave their homes in the dark. And the worst part? This is not a fantasy movie, but a harsh reality. You think you're watching an apocalyptic movie? No, this is Italy, last week. And the story doesn't end there. It started with 3 days of relentless rain. The soil couldn't absorb the water, the rivers had no more room to hold it. The sewer system was overloaded. And then, the famous Barovia Bridge collapsed completely at 5 a.m., sweeping away dozens of vehicles. Rescue teams had just minutes to react before the entire area turned into a deadly river. It all started with a low-pressure system moving in from the Mediterranean, bringing unusually heavy rainfall. In less than 24 hours, the rainfall exceeded the average for the entire month. The ground was saturated with water. The Po, the Arno, the Tiber all burst their banks. Floodwaters rushed in, sweeping away cars, bending electric poles, tearing apart even the hardest concrete roads. In some places, people had to climb onto their roofs, screaming for help in vain for hours. The mudslides swept through villages and towns. No one had time to react. Areas like Emilia-Romagna, Tuscany, Marche, once the economic heart of the central region, were now reduced to rubble. The water swept away everything: cars, buses, trucks. Roads that were once sturdy now cracked as if torn by an invisible hand. Transport systems collapsed. Electricity was cut off. Internet was lost. People were stranded, unable to communicate, unable to call for help. Local authorities declared a state of emergency. 2.4 million people were forced to evacuate. Many places were completely isolated. Planes could not land. Railways were paralyzed. It was an evacuation of the century, the likes of which Italy has not seen in decades. In the town of Faenza, Giuseppe, an elderly mechanic, used his own wooden boat to rescue more than 30 people from a waterlogged residential area. He simply said, "I couldn't stand by and watch my neighbors drown." On another roof, a young mother tied a rope around herself, grabbed her 2 young children and swam through the 10-degree water in the dark to find higher ground. She succeeded, but her arm was torn off after hitting a steel fence. And then there were those who didn't make it in time. An 84-year-old man died in his home after failing to get out in time. As the water rose, he was alone. No one knows who he called in his final moments. To date, more than 40,000 people have been evacuated. Hundreds of bridges were damaged. Many railway lines could not be restored for weeks, and many factories were shut down. The damage was estimated at billions of euros, but that cannot be measured in tears. Amid the chaos, there were still small fires that lit up hope. A group of young people volunteered to row rubber boats to rescue the elderly and children. They were not paid. They did not wear badges. They only had hearts. Many people lost all their possessions, their homes, their memories of a lifetime. In some towns, local authorities had to use helicopters to deliver bottles of water. Packets of biscuits, like in wartime. A 12-year-old boy pulled his sister from the raging water by tying a rope around himself and holding onto a door frame. A small act, but it could be the difference between life and death. In Busto Arsizio, the floodwaters not only submerged the streets, houses, cars, but also knocked out the entire city's power grid. In a few minutes, Everything was plunged into absolute darkness. The darkness did not come only from the loss of electricity. It also came from the utter fear as people climbed onto their roofs. Holding their children, their eyes fixed on the deep blackness, waiting for rescue, and that was only part of the tragedy. Busto Arsizio, a peaceful industrial city in northern Italy, was caught off guard. Within 2 hours, rainfall broke all historical records. Drains collapsed, sewers backed up, dirty water, mud, oil and rubbish flooded every corner. Small shops were submerged, the life savings of thousands of families disappeared overnight. Parking lots turned into rivers. Cars were piled on top of each other like toy models, dragged mercilessly by the water. When the grid went down, the warning system went down. The hospital switched to backup power. But it wasn't enough to keep all the ventilators running. One night, one city, a haunting end, people climbed onto their roofs. They didn't have luggage in their hands, they had children. Wedding photos, a few sets of dry clothes. In the wind and rain, they waved white towels, lit flares, but the rescue team couldn't reach them all. Some families waited for 11 hours in the cold, without water, without food, and while they waited, they watched their neighbors being swept away by the water and couldn't do anything. A 6-year-old child with a high fever fell asleep on a floating plank, in the arms of his crying mother. She said, "I just pray for morning, and for my child to breathe." If Busto Arsizio is a disaster for modern man, Padua has suffered a disaster of human memory. When the floodwaters hit the city, it wasn't just the streets that were flooded. The ancient monuments, churches, museums, and centuries-old libraries were not spared. Original Renaissance manuscripts, ancient drawings, maps, priceless historical documents, parchment, handwritten ink, pages soaked with water, blurred with words, disintegrated in the hands of conservation experts, who could only cry. "We didn't lose things," said a museum employee. "We lost memories." And then, in the midst of the worst days, the best people, the people of Busto, Padua, they didn't break down. They cleaned the mud with their bare hands. They cooked soup and shared it. Young men rowed boats to rescue dozens of strangers. A 15-year-old boy returned 3 times to take the elderly out of their homes. No one asked about religion, skin color, or background. Only one thing was asked. Do you need help? But in the midst of the storm, people are the light. When the road collapses, they build bridges with their hands. When the water floods, they hold hands and swim across. When everything collapses, they start again, from scratch. When these images are gone, will we remember? Or will they scroll by, like every other disaster video? There are no superheroes. No miracles, just ordinary people, standing side by side, sweating, sharing packets of noodles, blankets. Natural disasters are not human fault. It's how we build them, how we treat nature, that makes tragedies worse. Climate change is no longer a distant concept, it's knocking on our doors. Right now, floods don't discriminate between rich and poor. But compassion always distinguishes us as human beings. The Italian people are clearing mud, rebuilding roofs, searching for loved ones. But they don't need pity. They need us to wake up. We can no longer call this a natural disaster. Climate change is not a conspiracy theory. It is happening, and Italy is paying the price. Every flood is not just a natural event, it is the result of decades of deforestation, concrete, and ignored warnings. We cannot change the past, but we can change the way we live today, to protect cities like Padua and Busto from becoming memories floating in the mud. Water can drown the streets, but it cannot extinguish faith. Under the mud is the foundation for a new beginning. Under the collapsed roof is a resilient heart that has never stopped beating. And amid the rubble, thousands of hands are working together to rebuild tomorrow. They are not waiting for a miracle. They created their own miracles. Because Italy may have fallen, but it never surrendered. When we look at Italy today, let us not just feel compassion, but learn about resilience, about community, and about nature's reminder. We cannot treat the earth as our enemy, and expect it to protect us in times of trouble. Let us look at the solidarity, the courage, and even the tears, to remind each other, in this uncertain world, what makes us human, is how we rise again after being broken. One day, the waters will recede, the roads will be mended, the bridges will be rebuilt stronger. But the memory of these dark days will forever be a scar in Italy's heart. If you are watching this video, don't just share your sadness. Share your awareness. Spread solidarity. Tell the world, we have seen, and we will not forget. Because natural disasters can wash away everything, but they cannot wash away humanity. Thank you and everyone who is watching the news. Please subscribe to the channel to follow the next news.